joining us. We got a full room. We got standing room, but I will tell you all, this is not SeaWorld. This is not the Shamu Splash Zone. So there's some extra chairs up front for those of y'all who are in the back. We are going to have some folks that we're going to be inviting up to the front in a little while. But you know what I wanted to do first is introduce myself. Tell you my name is Manny Pelaez. I'm a city councilman. And this park, Hardberger Park, is shared by District 9 and District 8. And it really is one of the jewels of the north side. For how many of you, is this the first time you've ever been to Hardberger? Great. Well, I hope it's not the last time. I hope that you guys like what you see. And it really is one of the most beautiful features that the north side boasts, and I hope you guys come back. It's your park. What we're going to do now is I'm going to, first of all, tell you guys that for anybody who needs to use the restroom, it's out there to the back, okay? Two, a lot of you have kids at home or other things you got to worry about. If you brought your cell phones, please leave them on. Feel free to take any calls, but if you do have to take calls, please do that outside so that everybody else here can continue listening to the presentation. Three, you will need your cell phones. You will need them today. We're going to use every single one of you, whoever brought one of those weapons of mass destruction, your cell phones. We're going to be using those today so that we can facilitate the conversation. And you guys are going to see we've tried this out at prior town halls. Okay? So let's start with the first thing I want to tell you. We've had this is the third of 3 town halls. Each town hall continues to get a little bit bigger. The first one we had in this room, the second one we had at the library downtown, and this is going to be our third one. Every single one of them has, in my opinion, been a success. I have no doubt that today is going to be a success as well. There are some folks in the back with cameras. This is the most cameras we've had at this one. And so for those of you folks that do want to walk around and get up and take your phone calls, this is my last housekeeping matter. Make sure not to block cameras because I think there's 1 or 2 people here who are going to be live streaming, and so we want to be considerate to them and to the people at home. So, difficult conversation is what we have been calling this series of town halls. You know, a difficult conversation, and we've all had them, right? We've all had difficult conversations with friends. We've all had difficult conversations with families and strangers. And so I think that in order to have one, we're going to need to establish what it is we're doing today and what we're not doing today. You know, I've gotten to, like you, you probably heard about this on Facebook. You probably heard about this via email. Somebody sent you something on Nextdoor. You may have heard about it on the radio or television. And, you know, I've been listening to, some of the radio stations talking about this, and I've seen some stuff on Facebook. And there's a lot of folks out there who think they were showing up to an anti-gun rally or a pro-gun rally. It's not what we had planned. That's never what we've done for Town Hall 1 or Town Hall 2. In fact, the only thing that you guys showed up to today was a difficult conversation. And it's a conversation with some folks who are going to be at the mic. There's going to be mics throughout the evening that I'm going to be walking around and handing off. And every single one of these town halls has featured people who disagree, who agree. And they agree and disagree at different levels and in different amounts. But at the very end of the evening, everybody walked in here and everybody walked out with one goal in mind, and that was to listen, to make sure that their idea got heard, and to try to understand just a little bit better what somebody else was saying. That's it. If we accomplish that today, then we will have checked off the box that is marked goal. Okay? So here's some rules. I will stick to these. And I promise you that I will stick to these. Number 1, here's a promise. By the way, whenever a lawyer makes you a promise, you should think about running the other way, okay? And I'm a lawyer, all right? Number 2, whenever a lawyer who happens to be a politician happens to make you a promise, run faster, right? But this one I'm going to keep. I promise you, today you're going to hear things that you disagree with. I promise you, today, some of those things with which you disagree might make you mad. I promise you that today you are going to feel like your hand was up and maybe I didn't call you fast enough, okay? Or maybe I called on one person who has an opinion different than yours too often. You're going to feel that way, okay? That's just the nature of calling on people in groups. I promise you that you're going to walk out here tonight and say, I wish he would have asked X, right? I promise you that tonight you're going to say to yourself, yeah, but what about these things that weren't said? That is the imperfect nature of a group conversation with a large group of people with a limited amount of time, okay? I will keep every one of those promises. Now, I also promise that I'm going to try to get to as many of you as possible. I'll try to also help you move along. You know, sometimes, and you're seeing it happen right now, we lawyers, we charge by the word. And so sometimes people with a microphone, we might get a little too verbose. And so I'm going to try to help you along. I might even rephrase your question just to make sure that we can all hear it, we can all understand it. Nothing perfect is going to happen tonight, but we're going to try to get it right, okay? Here's my request of you. If somebody is talking, can I get a commitment from all of you to not interrupt? Yeah, that's the right thing to do, right? That's the way difficult conversations happen between neighbors, okay? During our conversation, can I get a commitment from everybody in this room not to hurl epithets and ad hominems, but to really stick to the issue that we're talking about? Can I get a commitment from all of you? Great, thank you for that. Guys, let's have a difficult conversation. So what I wanted to do is to show you just a few things, a few slides. And I got a friend in the room. Where's Mike? Mike Mulhalski. I massacre your last name. How did I get it right? Mulhalski. He's the CEO and owner of Sons of Liberty Gunworks. I appreciate you being here today, Mike. You're one of the guys who's been holding me most accountable online. And so I hope I got these right, okay? So what I'd like to do is start first by making sure that we all understand what it is we're talking about today and how it is we got here. All right, so there's a guy recording. So we have, for all of you that, you know, you've got to be living under a rock if you didn't see El Paso. You have to be living under a rock if you didn't see Dayton and Midland, Odessa play out, or Sutherland Springs. I have to make a confession. For me, El Paso was different. Different because it was personal for me. You know, a lot of you think that I'm from San Antonio, and I've been from San Antonio my whole life. I'm not. I'm from El Paso. I went to high school, and I went to middle school there. And that day after the shooting, I just sat there all day long, and I was with my team really thinking long and hard about that one incident and why that one felt different to me than all the others. I feel kind of bad that it felt different to me. I feel guilty, and because I spent the whole day thinking about how I was going to word the text to my loved ones, my family members there, my friends who were there, the first responders in El Paso with whom I'm friends, people at City Hall who I knew were having probably the worst day of their lives. And, you know, I wrote this text over and over again, and I kept deleting it and not sending it. Are you okay? Delete, 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 delete. Okay, don't send that one. How are you? Delete, delete, don't send that one. By the way, again, remember, if I've got the gift for anything, it's talking a lot and writing a lot, right? And for the first time in my life, I had a difficult time forming a short text. Anyway, I started making phone calls and just letting people know, I'm worried about you, I'm thinking about you, right? But as soon as I got back, I started telling my team, I want to do something different, something meaningful, something authentic, something that's different than politicians or pundits or talking heads talking back and forth at each other, right? Instead of just the simple Facebook and the tweet from your politician friends who say, I send you my expressions of sympathy and my expressions of sadness and regret, and then we sit back and wait for the next mass shooting to happen. Because isn't that the way it plays out every single time? And then people forget, and then the next mass shooting happens, and then here come all the tweets expressing sadness and regret, and then nothing ever comes after that expression. I told my team I want to do something. And they said, well, why don't you take it on the road, go talk to your neighbors, and see if they feel the way you feel, and let's answer some questions. Question number one, why does it happen? At the first town hall, folks, we had that conversation, why? Sitting up here, we had a panel of speakers. One of them was an expert on mental health. The other one was an expert on political rhetoric and its role in violence. And the third one was an expert in here in our faith community. We had Rabbi Nathan show up. And we talked about why these things happen, why we feel the way we do, why it plays out the way it does on TV and on social media. A lot of you had questions, a lot of you had comments. It was a really lively, engaging conversation. And a lot of you started asking questions of each other, and it was fascinating. And it really was what I wanted to accomplish. The second town hall was a town hall with our police chief, our fire chief, the police chief from UTSA, Gerald Lewis, and Sheriff Salazar, all four of them up there. And their talk was about what? What are we in San Antonio prepared to do, and what do we have in place in order to respond to an active shooter scenario should one of these things play out? We talked about the equipment on fire trucks, the ballistic gear that firefighters now have to wear. We talked about whole blood, that, on-the-fly transfusions out in the scene. We had a fascinating conversation. Mike, you were there, and I think you got some friends who were there too, and I think everybody walked out of there learning something that we didn't know that night. Today, the conversation is about policy, which really is the question, what next, right? What comes after we've talked and felt and investigated and learned? What do we do, right? And so we got together and we decided, okay, we're gonna have a panel of elected officials telling you their ideas about what to do. And then Midland Odessa happened, and it occurred to me, all your politicians have had plenty of time to talk to you. They all had press conference, they all issued press releases. We all know what they were gonna say. The one group that we never talked to is you. So we turned it around, and we spoke about that, and we decided that the real panel of experts who needs to be heard is you. You're the panel of experts. Today we're gonna be hearing from you. Elected officials are gonna be coming up here today, they're gonna be sitting and listening to you. I hope you showed up with your ideas. I hope you showed up with your comments. But again, we need to identify what we're talking about. We're talking about today. We're talking about mass shootings, mass murder, gun violence. If you wanted to talk about other things, there will be other town halls sometime in the future, and I'm sure there's other town halls in other parts of town. Those are the topics that we're discussing today. So let's define mass shooting, and let's just try to get on the same definition. Some of you will agree, some of you will disagree with this definition, okay? However, it's the definition that comes from the Gun Violence Archive. It's the definition that pretty much every media source from every single flavor of the political spectrum uses to define it, okay? And it's basically 4 or more people shot or killed in a single incident, okay? That's roughly the definition. I've gotten calls and Facebook messages and emails from people saying that is a BS definition. I disagree with that. Because that also includes the random drive-by. That includes the guy who shoots up a liquor store and happens to shoot 4 people, right? That doesn't feel like the definition of El Paso, Midland, Odessa, Dayton, Sutherland Springs, Mandalay Bay. Am I right? It doesn't feel that way. So I said, well, how does the FBI define it? Next slide. The FBI does not define it. For those of you that don't know, the FBI does not define mass shootings. They do have a definition, and so does the White House, the Department of Justice, Department of Education, Homeland Security, and FEMA for an active shooter event. And this one says an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined and populated area. Is there anybody in this room who disagrees with that definition? Okay, then we're all on the same page about something. Good. Let's see if we can build on that agreement. Next slide. So the other thing that we started looking at, we started asking ourselves, is it worse in the United States? Is it? So let me ask you two this way. Is gun violence, just violence involving guns in one way or another, is it worse in the United States than any other country? How many of you would say yes? Raise your hands. You think it's worse than anywhere else? Okay. And who else? Somebody raise their hand. You think it's worse in the United States? I have to tell you, I came to this and this topic agreeing with that. And if you look at this next slide, here is the list. It's an ugly list, but we're not. According to most statistical analyses, we are roughly number 10 in the world when it comes to deaths resulting from a gunshot, okay? Now, this includes pretty much everything, okay? And this is per 10,000 people, right? Statistically adjusted to make sure that every single country's population is taken into account. we're number 10. So we're not number 1, okay? But look at those countries from 1 to 9 and 11 to 20. I call it an ugly list because most of them are third world countries. Most of them, have either cartels or administrations who are dictatorial or tyrannical and have some very, very serious problems, including genocide and war going on in them, right? So we're not number 1, but we're also, there's no reason to be proud to be on this list, okay? Next slide. However, when you apply that FBI definition of active shooter incident, and you take out police shootings, you take out military shootings, organized crime, and you just look at that, the active shooter, lone wolf, rampage shooting, whatever you want to call it. You look at it, the United States does come out number 1. If you take all of these continents and combine them together, we still beat them 3 to 1, okay? That's just math. So, if you look at the next one, though, this is a pretty interesting slide. And Mike, thank you for turning me on to this one. Mike asked me to include this because I learned something new. I went out and started looking at the FBI reports. The latest data that's available to us is a 2017 breakdown. And the FBI does this every few years. And if you look at, deaths, and these are just deaths, homicides, using broken down by weapon or cause. Handguns, 46%. Firearms of an unknown type, 21%. Look at that. Knives, 20%. In 20% of homicides, knives are the cause. In 11% of homicides, hands and feet are the cause. Much, much fewer than that, rifles, and still even fewer is shotguns and then the unclassified other, right? Pretty interesting. How many of you are surprised to learn that knives and hands and feet result in more deaths than deaths from rifles? Anybody surprised in here? You are not surprised? Not you. Okay. I'll confess, I was surprised. I've shared this slide with some other folks, and they're like, I thought, and I've heard somebody say, I thought rifles were higher up, right? In particular, Mike, what kind of rifles? AR-15s, right? That's the rifle everybody likes to talk about. The AR-15 rifle is, in a lot of folks' minds, the AR-15 rifle is the rifle that has resulted in almost all these deaths. That's not true. Next slide. If you look at just the gun deaths, however, take all those deaths that I wrote up, or exclude knives, exclude feet, right? Exclude asphyxiation, exclude drowning, and you look at just gun deaths, here's another interesting fact that jumped out at me and really made me think. Suicides account for more than half of all gun-related deaths. Is anybody in this room surprised by that? Not you, sir. Why not?
It's very clear that when you look at the data, that the suicide rate for the United States, by hanging, by other means, we have a large suicide problem.
We do.
That we do. There is a piece of that if you look and you study suicides, you will quickly find the number that associates with those gun deaths.
If you look at the tiny green and yellow sliver, for those of you that can't see all the way up here, those are shootings involving law enforcement, and the other ones are accidental or unknown. All the other in dark blue, that's homicides. I'm showing you these slides that really contradict a lot of assumptions that we hear out there because I want to be completely honest with you. It's really easy to go out there and say the number one cause of death, when a gun is involved is a homicide. But it's just not true. It's a suicide. However, that doesn't mean that that's not a boatload of homicides. That's a lot. And that's a lot of suicides. Yes, sir?
If you take out gang violence homicide, the number is minuscule.
If you take out gang violence homicide, the number is minuscule. Okay. And you know what? I'm going to assume you're right. Okay? I don't know, but I'm going to assume you're right. Can anybody here tell me whether or not the survivors of a shooting care whether or not it was gang-related or not when they're in the ambulance or when they got to bury their kid or anything like that? I mean, that's, right? I mean, at the end of the day, homicide is homicide whether or not it was gang-related or not. And so I'm pushing back on you just to elicit the conversation. Why is that important to you and why mention it?
Because a lot of gang violence, they shouldn't have a gun in the first place.
Okay,
They're a felon with a gun.
okay,
A youngster with a handgun, they're between the ages of 12 and 16, and they're shooting each other.
okay, got it.
And gun owners are getting the blame for this kid getting lumped in with the AR-15 and handguns.
Got it.
And it really shouldn't be.
Good, thanks for that comment. You had your hand up?
All right, so spent coming up on 10 years.
10 years.
In New York City.
Okay,
All right, same neighborhood where Spike Lee set and shot the movie Do the Right Thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would go to bed to the sound of gunshots, which is really ironic considering how New York City is a gun-free city.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also at the time the policy of stop and frisk. So there's a highest amount of probability anywhere around the world for illegal guns that were meant to do nothing but harm to be found out. It was in my neighborhood.
okay,
All right. Most, if not all, of the murders that I knew about that would pop up around, apart from cops getting murdered in that Section 8 housing, would be gang criminals exacting business practices. That's pretty much all that I got to say about it.
okay,
And so for a while, living in New York City at the beginning, I maintained my anti-gun position because I figured, that's not my racket. I don't care. It doesn't really have to do with me. You know, lo and behold, it came around when we're okay, and when we're actually getting down to talking about stuff, I got a quick minute and a half for you here.
Okay.
That's going to be really interesting. But
Hold on to it, 'cause I'm gonna call on you again.
I want to reserve this. I want you to wrap up
got
with
it.
what you're on.
Tell me your name.
Kyle.
Okay, guys, we're going to call on Kyle again. Thanks, Kyle, for that. What's interesting, what you just said to me that really stood out, is that you've come around to change your position from when you lived in New York to where you live now. I want to talk about that a little later, okay? All right, next slide I want to show you. I already went through this, so let me jump ahead. So now I'm going to invite our elected officials and or their reps up to the table. Ray Lopez, your state rep, is here. Ray, come on up. Thanks so much. Help me welcome Ray. We have Councilwoman Melissa Habdra from District 6. Melissa? We've got Councilwoman Jada Sullivan from District 2. Come on, Jada. We got Councilman John Courage, who thinks this is his park, but it's part mine too. John Courage from District 9. Thank you for being here. We've also got the mayor of San Antonio, Ron Nirenberg. Come on up, Ron. Thank you for being here. All right, so I've talked to each and every one of these elected officials. They know what the name of the game is tonight. It's to listen. There will be times, however, I'm going to ask them for their reaction to some of the things you say because I'm honestly genuinely interested in what they got to say, okay? So, policy. Public policy is always an interesting discussion that usually happens in the should we category, right? Should we pass this rule? Should we cancel out this rule? Should we enforce it this way? Should we enforce it that way? The should we conversation is almost always about morals, ethics, community expectations, mores, right? And values. There's two parts of policy, however, that we rarely, if ever, talk about, which in my opinion are just important, and I hope that you guys agree. The can we question. So, should we, in the city of San Antonio, decide that the IRS code is no longer applicable to any San Antonian? Yes. Got it. Okay, all right, we agree, okay? We agree on that.
Problem solved.
But can we? Okay? You stick with me. You're my next chief of staff. I'm going to make you my chief of policy, whoever said we can. Can we Sure, we can write it down on a piece of paper, we can, put a stamp on it, send it up to DC, right? We certainly can write a law. In fact, we can even create our own IRS department internally, right? And we can fund it, we can, get everybody name tags and business cards and go from there, okay? But I know, you don't like it, all right? But the third question is the one that I want to talk about with all of you right now. And that's the may we question. Does the law, the Second Amendment, federal Supreme Court decisions, Texas Supreme Court decisions, state law, do those allow for municipalities to regulate weapons? Anybody? Does anybody think that it might? No? Nobody in the room thinks it might? Okay. Well, I'll tell you, Mayor and Councilman Courage and Councilwoman Sullivan and Councilwoman Haberda, have any of you received calls from constituents saying, do something, make this type of gun illegal, prohibit that type of gun or all guns from this one area, et cetera, et cetera? Councilwoman Haberda.
I have received calls on both sides of it, but they're specifically asking for the AR-15s and those kinds of weapons to
Yeah.
be banned in the city of San Antonio.
Okay. Councilwoman Sullivan, has anybody asked you?
I've been asked. I've been asked, when do we stop?
Yeah.
We have a significant reason in our district to look at what we can do, but then we know that we as a city are very limited. And what I tell them is, it comes with us making one step first.
All right, so hold that there, because I want you to meet, I've mentioned him a couple of times. Mike, you want to stand up, please, and we're going to get you a mic. Where's Mike's microphone? Mike, you're one of the most knowledgeable people on this topic that I've ever gotten to meet. You're a bit intense. I want to recommend Diet Coke without caffeine. No more caffeine for Mike, okay? But you really are, and you're very straightforward. The answer to my question, do cities and counties have the may we ability to regulate weapons, prohibit certain kinds, and more importantly, why not? Or why yes?
Well, we have state preemption laws, right?
I'm sorry, state what?
There's state preemption laws.
Okay.
So you are limited to what you can do by state preemption laws and by the federal government, by the Second Amendment. There are things that you guys have been proposing, though, that should concern everybody in this room, like rezoning gun shops. That's something that isn't within your power to do, right? Zoning restrictions for arms dealers,
Yep.
taxes.
So
for-
those things
for FFLs.
those things are within a city's power?
Are they not?
I don't know. I'm asking you. We'll get to that. This is a trick
I
question.
believe
wanna see if you
I
know.
believe you proposed that, so I would imagine that it is in the city's power. But as far as banning something, no, I don't think that can be done in Texas. No.
All right. Thank you. I'm gonna keep coming back to you. Okay, Mike? Let's go to this next slide because I want to show you all something. This is what we call the inverted triangle when it comes to what governments can and cannot do. Obviously, the federal government has way more power, right? Because of its, Commerce Clause powers and its taxing authority, its police powers, et cetera, to be able to regulate a lot more things than the state government can. Does anybody disagree with that? You disagree that the federal government has more power than the state government to regulate things.
I think your local government has more power to enact, change in effect on your local citizenry than the federal government does.
Got it.
It doesn't, as a citizen, the rules that they make really don't affect me much.
Okay.
I don't respond to a king. It's you guys that we look to.
Okay, well, I guarantee you, certainly nobody up here is a king, and we certainly don't think so. And you should know that, the phone calls that we get at the mayor's office and at our office, nobody has ever thought that we're a king. Nobody starts the conversation with your highness. I've been trying to get my staff to start conversations with me like that, but it doesn't work. All right, this is the inverted pyramid, and I'm going to show you why, okay? And let's start with the locally. And locally, there are two types of government, municipal governments and county government. I'm going to fly through this kind of fast. There is a statute, a very well-written, in English statute that says municipalities, Mayor, you and I, we're not allowed to adopt regulations relating to the transfer, private ownership, keeping, transportation, licensing, registration of firearms, air guns, knives, ammunition, or firearm or air gun supplies. Especially the air gun supplies, right? We are also, at the city council level, Mayor, not allowed to regulate the discharge of a firearm or air gun at a sport shooting range. I will tell you that the same rules apply to counties, and there it is. They, however, can regulate the discharge of firearms in unincorporated parts of a city, so long as it's less than 10 acres on a private piece of property. And so I guess I guess that basically means neighborhoods outside the city limits, okay? Mayor, you know about this, that that the city of San Antonio can't do all those things, and how do you react to that?
Well, we pay attention to the law. Local government code, I think that's 229.
Yep.
Lays out specific responsibilities of the city, what can and can't do. I don't know the gentleman's name back there that answered the previous question, but the reason why there is a Bill of Rights is it sets boundaries for governments below us, even the federal government, from which we can infringe. But there are opportunities granted to us as a public to decide where those boundaries are. And that's been tested over time in courts. I think one of the things that you're seeing right now with regard to why we're getting these phone calls is that we keep seeing people die. And there are common sense things that have been discussed at the state level that some state leaders have simply not acted upon, not even taken up the conversation. So what happens is, because there is the view that, yes, we see you in the grocery store, we see you in traffic, we get your phone calls, we see you at the door, we come to your door. If something's not being addressed at the state level or the federal level, guess who's going to get the phone call? Me and my colleagues. Doesn't mean we can do it. I have phone calls sometimes from folks that think we already banned something when we don't even have the authority to do that. But the point of all of this is that, thank you, Manny, for having this town hall. This is a conversation that we need to have because it's not happening anywhere else.
Ray, State Rep Lopez, you were at one point a city councilman. Now that you're up there in the state and spend a lot of time in Austin, were you aware of this statute? And is this something y'all talk about often when you guys meet?
No, I never had an opportunity to review the statute. I knew vaguely what it stood for. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the calls that we got on a daily basis was stray dogs, dead dogs, didn't pick up my trash, somebody's parked in my spot, and a lot of those kinds of things that we spend a lot of our time in. But that's what they ask us to do.
Yeah.
And we are out there responding to it. Unfortunately, some of the things that are life and death affecting oftentimes aren't the calls that we get, and we wind up finding other reasons to occupy our day as opposed to trying to sort through some of the regulatory mess that's out there and try to find a good path forward. I've had a conversation as early as today where folks were saying, if you just enforce the laws that are in the books, you guys would be in pretty good shape. And coming to think about it, that's exactly the direction we need to take. As a government, what we need to do is say, municipalities or whatever other entities are out there that have to enforce these state laws, then we need to, as well as a state agency, say, and here's the funding and the mechanism by which you're going to do it, and then here's how we're going to come back and we're going to expend effort to make sure that you're doing it. We're going to measure it. We're going to see that there's results. If the results are good, we're going to increase it. If the results are bad, we're going to change it. We don't take the time to do that because we spend all our time worrying about the loose dog and the trash can that didn't get picked up.
The pothole.
The pothole that didn't get filled. And while those are important, no question about it, I've got a wobble in my tire because of one of those potholes. Maybe I'll talk to you about it later. The reality of it is we seem to only get slapped up on the face when we hear Sutherland Springs, Odessa, El Paso, and things and things of that nature. And by God, now, when we hear those things, Manny, we do go back and take a look. And
All
we
right.
are starting to be more diligent.
Well, then let's take a look at what the state can and can't do. Here it is. I went and, I put my law license to work, and I went and I categorized every single one of the things that states have authority to do. I will tell you this is a non-exhaustive list. It's an imperfect list because PowerPoint slides can only get so small, okay? So, for those of you that have bad eyes like I do, I'm a little closer. The state has the authority to regulate in some ways ammunition. They have the authority to limit the number of guns a person can possess. There's some argument as to how they can go about that, but that's what's on the books. They can require owners to obtain a license to own a gun. According to the courts, they can require owners to register their firearms. The states can also require background checks for certain sales, require dealers to obtain a license, regulate or prohibit categories of firearms or magazines, limit where, when, and how firearms can be carried. They can adopt consumer, child, and safety regulations. They can regulate gun shows or not regulate them if they so choose. And that last one will be a surprise until our screen gets back up and running. For those of you that saw those in blue, Mike, you're my expert on some of this. Is it fair to say that those that I highlighted in blue is Texas does not do? They basically say whatever the feds say, we'll go with that, but we're not going to do, Texas background checks, or we're not going to obligate Mike to get a license to manufacture. Is that about right?
We're regulated by federal.
By federal law.
We're a federal firearms license.
Yep.
That's what we're regulated by. And no, Texas does not have any of this nonsense.
Right. So I know, and remember when I told you guys, you're going to see things today with which you disagree. But do we at least have an agreement that this nonsense, right, has been carved out by the courts and the federal government and been given as part of the state police power for them to do? And Texas has chosen not to. Do you have a disagreement with what I just said?
States like California and New York have done things like this.
Because they have that power. They think they have that power, so they exercise that power. Am I right?
Until we challenge that in the Supreme Court, yes.
Okay. What Texas does do is Texas does limit when, where, how firearms can be carried, adopt a consumer and child safety regulation, and they do prosecute and investigate gun-related crimes. Mr. Courage, does this list behind you, and particularly all the things that are blue, do they surprise you? Did you know that? How do you react to that? Because I have a feeling a lot of your constituents, like mine, think that these are things that you and I could do at City Council, right? And probably have no idea that it's things that we don't have the power to do and that we really look to the state to do or not do.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. People don't understand the limitations that local government has. They don't understand that these laws could exist in the state of Texas, but they don't. And so it's really amazing when people say, well, if we just enforce the laws on the books. Well, there's practically no laws on the books.
There's 22,000.
In Texas?
All right, okay. Say, John, you hit a nerve. I don't know if you noticed, yeah? Okay, all right, good, that's fair. All right, next one. I want to show you guys the long list. And Mayor, this one's for you. Take a look at this long list. Way too long to read for you, but of the thousands and thousands of laws in the United States, the ones that are shared in every single state are the federal ones. They have to observe those first. Look at this list. Does anybody disagree that these are the things that the federal government does in terms of regulations and law? So, for example, the federal government has regulations regarding ammunition. Does the federal government have regulations regarding ammunition? Mike? Yeah, they do. Does the federal government have regulations regarding open carry in federal parks?
Maybe we can get to the point of what you guys are proposing.
How about I run my meeting and then you and I mean with all respect, man, right? You were a guest and you're being a good one so far, and I hope that you can continue to be one. What I want is to point out that the federal government touches upon every single one of these topics, okay? Mayor, have you ever seen, are you familiar with the scope and breadth of what the federal government can do?
And read it verbatim without looking at it? No.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a list of what the federal government can do and can't do?
I've seen a list of what the federal government cannot do. It's in the
Okay.
Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
But insofar as where is the area between the rights agreed upon and where we think safe regulation of firearms are, this is a pretty strong list for communities at the state and federal level to be talking about.
Great. Mayor, up there, I'm going to tell you, I'm a gun owner. I own multiple guns. And I'm going to tell you right now, I own rifles. Mike, you and I have talked about you helping me outfit my AR-15. I own one. I inherited it, and that's a very, very long story for a later day. I own pistols, Mayor. I own a shotgun. I'm a very, very bad shot with my shotgun, but I like to go out and do trap and skeet. I own an old gun that I inherited. You heard recently that there's some council members who are proposing a gun buyback. And we had a reaction from our chief of police who said, wait a second, that's not going to work, right? Those are two different leaders from the city, right, with very similar letterheads, saying two different things. I'm putting you on the spot. What do you think about that? Sure.
No, I think we have the wrong expectations if we think a voluntary gun buyback, which it is, it's a voluntary gun buyback program. We have the wrong expectations if we think that is going to solve our problems with gun violence. The issue is that everyone has seen, in this conversation, it's been going on for years. Every time there's a mass shooting, every time there's an innocent life taken by gun violence, we immediately go to what can we do to keep from that happening ever again? Is it to take away people's guns? Is it to make sure that people who shouldn't have guns don't get them? Is it to do this or is it to do that? And if we're looking for the one thing that we can do, we're never going to find it. So my colleagues brought forth the idea of a voluntary gun buyback program as a way of getting guns that shouldn't be in circulation to be brought up so they don't fall into the wrong hands, whether that's somebody who's going to commit a crime, which the research shows that rarely, if ever, happens, or someone who might use it on themselves or accidentally shoot somebody in their families. In my perspective, getting that gun out of the hands of somebody it shouldn't be into is a good idea, especially if we're not using taxpayer dollars to do it.
Councilwoman Haverda, what do you think?
Just bring it over. All right. Thank you. I'm going to preface my comments by saying I'm a Texas girl. I'm also a gun owner, right? Born and raised in Texas. I'm not sure you can be a citizen of Texas without at least shooting a gun at one point in your life. And I, respectfully to my colleagues, I don't think that the gun buyback program is going to do really what it's intended to do. I appreciate the sentiment, and I'm here tonight really to listen, but I have to just make the comment that I don't know what the answer is, but I know that I am, I'm happy that we have the gun laws that we have, and I want to promote responsible gun ownership. I just don't want to limit it too much. I don't think anybody's going to take my guns away. I'm not that guy, right? But I just am a little concerned about how far we can go, and not just. Not obviously. There's not a lot we can do locally, but as a state, as a country, until we really just get people just up in arms about it. No pun intended. But I really, that's my concern, and I don't have the answer. I don't, again, respectfully to you guys, I don't think that the gun buyback is going to do a lot for us. I practice criminal law. I deal with people day to day that illegally own guns, and even through the court system, you have to turn your gun in when you've been arrested. So I know our laws are imperfect, but I really would like to hear tonight, from you guys, what you propose.
So,
and I'm sorry to take over, but also I have to leave at 7, so I don't want to be disrespectful.
You got it. So if she sneaks out, please forgive her. So why don't we do this? We promised we'd get to Kyle. Kyle, what do you think?
All right. This goes really quick. It's 2 pages, but it's also double spaced, all right?
That doesn't sound quick, Kyle.
Questions? All right. So, first of all, thank you everybody for affording all of us this opportunity to express our ideas on this absolutely egregious problem that we face, right? So, everyone in this room, we're all on board that with our opinions of mass shootings, it's completely unacceptable, and the big question in our minds, together, on either side of this issue, is how do we keep deadly weapons of any kind out of the hands of someone who is psychologically ill,
Okay.
all right? And we just have different roads to get there. Personally, a few short years ago, I would have been blaming guns. I would have been in here demanding that nothing gets sold. We do a complete prohibition on the Second Amendment. here and anywhere else. All right. So long story short, after living in New York City in the gun-free zone for coming up on 10 years there, I had to admit the difference between my expectations of reality and what the real world was. All right. So a few years into seeing what the bloody and deadly failures of gun-free zones are, I resorted to the internet to try and find enough information to shore up my anti-gun idealism. All right. Some of the points, Manny, you put up on the screen earlier. That's just some of the stuff that I found.
Some. Okay.
So I had to come to terms with the fact that if I were to be embedded with my idealistic viewpoint, it wouldn't make me good or altruistic. It would make me a fanatic. All right? So everyone here agrees psychological health is the leading concern. Since the mid-1990s, depression, especially amongst kids, has been on the rise. Mirroring this is the rise of not just child but teen suicide, public and mass shootings. I have not seen a single proposal on how to attack, call out, and start to fix the actual root of the problem that everyone in this room agrees on, and that is a decline in mental health amongst our children. All
I'm
right?
not sure we agree on that point, though. No, I don't think everyone in this room agrees on that point.
No. Who here wants a psychopath to have a gun? Someone who's
We can agree on that, but that
That's-
mental health is the root cause of all gun violence. That is not agreeable.
if that came out wrong, I
Okay.
must have
Okay.
said
Okay.
something that
Okay.
I didn't
I misheard
that I
you
didn't
then.
read. I thought I was
Okay.
reading verbatim, but thanks for
Okay.
correcting me.
Yeah.
I'll definitely check back on one of 15 of these videos.
Okay.
But I don't think that I blamed psychological health for
I
all
misheard you
gun
then, I'm
violence.
sorry.
So, across the entire country, towns, San Antonio included, after school programming funding is being slashed. All right? So, what this results in is you've got underwhelmed, disillusioned kids who are turned loose at the end of a day to get embedded into social media where they're getting self-obsessed with image-based issues as well as all sort of materialistic obsessions. Instead of having access to sports, the arts, and the encompassing network of interpersonal connections that kids need to build their coping mechanisms, especially ones like myself who come from a broken home. In my home state of Connecticut, for example, in the wake of Sandy Hook, restrictions on gun sales and gun ownership increased under the auspice of keeping guns out of people who were mentally ill, while all funding for mental health was almost entirely removed from the state's budget. So why do gun control groups and the political leaders who embellish the anti-logic that any type of ban has ever worked to rid any kind of behavior in this country? When we take the death toll that we got to in the mid-late 80s with drunk driving, it was 33,000 plus. Today, it is less than half. Mothers Against Drunk Driving didn't blame cars, take them off the market, and as a country, we did not reinstate prohibition of alcohol. So can we please finally call out and address the threat of an epidemic of depression and mental health through education, through getting involved with our communities, with our youth in a positive and compassionate way, rather than limiting Americans' best chance at survival should they find themselves at odds with yet another product of a mental health crisis.
Thank you, Kyle. That's great. Thank you very much. So, so I got some young ladies over there with their hands red. Bo, why don't you go get ready to give somebody a mic? But in the meantime, you know, that's kind of laid at your feet, State Rep Lopez. Mental health, right? We've heard the governor talk a lot lately about mental health. We saw some executive orders come out. How do you respond to Kyle's points? They're not bad points.
No, they're not, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. As soon as we pulled some folks together here out of the caucus, the delegation here in San Antonio, we signed a letter asking the governor to please call a special session so we could have some dialogue, which is the only way the legislature can pass any legislation. Inside that request was really a list of things that he could, as he would, when he calls a special session, direct us to address. Mental health issues, and educational components of what we needed to address was on that list. Earlier I said we have a lot of laws on the books already. We need to enforce them, and there's no question. And as a state, we need to encourage municipalities to enforce them, then we need to give them funded mandates, not unfunded mandates, not demand that they do something and enforce a law that the state puts on them and then give them no resource to do it. Because that's typically what happens, knowing all sides of the unfunded mandate issue. So I think as a state, we need to be able to belly up to the bar and say, hey, listen, we're going to expect these laws to be passed, we're going to expect, and here's the funding and resources by which to do it. There are other laws that I think need to be addressed, other components of that law. Mental health is one of them. What I did, and I won't bore you with it, I'm glad to share it with you later, but I brought a list of the things that we submitted last session to try to get passed. There's nothing here earth-shattering. Nobody's knocking down doors and taking guns. But it is talking about how we go about incorporating education, how we go about identifying mental health issues. And then other things. I mean, there are databases out there that are easy to get a hold of. I mean, we all use anecdotally the example that says, I mean, if you're on the TSA no-fly list, that database doesn't get checked if you go get a gun. Is that correct? That's my understanding of it. And it could easily be done. So there are little things of databases that could be checked. Is any of that going to solve the problem overnight? And the answer is, of course not. But all of those collectively might make a difference. So there was a whole litany of things that we submitted, and mental health, identification, education was certainly some of it.
Thank you, sir. Let me jump to Councilwoman Sullivan. Councilwoman Sullivan, 20 veterans, at least 20 veterans commit suicide every single day. By the end of the day, at least 20 men and women who were in uniform will have killed themselves. We know that the majority of suicides are happening with, weapons, but regardless of that, mental health clearly has something to do with this problem. How do you see that play out in your community, and is that a conversation that you've been having with your constituents?
It's a conversation I had at home first. My husband, or my late husband, was a veteran, a Navy veteran. I myself am an Army veteran. Domestic violence played a huge key, but his mental health played a larger factor. We had weapons, which I myself am licensed to carry, and having that weapon in the home made it more accessible for him to have that weapon and then take us and my son at gunpoint before he killed himself. 2 weeks before that, he had gone to the VA. The VA told him he needed to see a priest. I believe in my heart of hearts that if that weapon hadn't been there, he would still be here, and we would have been able to get him the help that he needed. In my community, it wasn't a source of just mental health that's the issue. It is the source of having our youth that are too loose and available to go do things in the streets. Because I was a sophomore in high school when we had our first school shooting here at Sam Houston. And it was between the ages of 16, 15, 17, and 18-year-olds that had weapons shooting throughout a school and kids running trying to find some help. So I know firsthand that mental health plays a huge part of what we need to do in the society of making sure that we have these veterans that stay to tell the stories of how they survived and not just lose them to come home to their own demise. I think we need to do something more.
Thank you. The young ladies in the red had their hand up. You're my, one of you is the spokesperson over there, so. Okay, great, thanks. Identify yourself. Tell us why all of you showed up with the same uniform, and what does that say? I can't see from all the way over here.
Okay. Hi, we are with Students Demand Action. We are a local chapter here in San Antonio, and we work for common sense gun legislation. We don't want guns. We just want a safer U.S. We want a safer Texas because this is where we grow up, and it's very important to us. And also, hi, I am a self-absorbed teen. We're not self-absorbed, really. In the end, it's not a phone that's causing gun violence. Not one thing causes a mass shooting. Not one thing causes a suicide. Yes, mental health is a big issue, and that is something that it needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed across all boards for veterans because that's so important. When you come back from war and you have that, you also need mental health in schools for students, and having after-school programs does not fix that. And yes, that is very important for schools and growing up, but it does not make a mass shooter.
Got it. Mike, your hand's up.
Are there any veterans in here?
Good. Thank you for your service, guys.
All right. Unfortunately, I think all of us have lost people we know to suicide. It's a pretty big problem. My question is, though, is why has this conversation become so dishonest that we lump suicide in with gun violence? The question I have is, like, so people that kill themselves with a gun account for about half of the people that kill themselves. But you would question my sanity if I was up here talking about bridge violence or belt violence or pill violence, right? But we lump these numbers in, we add them to the total for gun violence. The only thing you can really assume about a person who shoots themselves is that they were pretty committed to die. Okay? Why are suicides counted towards this? Is it to bolster the numbers to make it look like more of an epidemic, the fact that they used a gun and not some other method?
Fair question. I think I know a person in the room who might do a good job at attempting to answer it, and you may or may not like the answer, but we're going to give her a chance, okay, Mike?
Sure.
She's sitting right behind you in the very, very pink jacket.
Thank you. I'm 5 feet tall. It's really hard for people to see me sometimes. At any rate, so one, I had a small correction in regards to the preemption law.
Okay.
As everyone, or some of us know, this past session, the 86th House Bill 3231 passed, and that particular preemption bill makes it so that municipalities and city governments cannot, sorry, my words are, they can't affect zoning of any gun dealers. So, and it's specific only to firearms. So with the suicide, and actually, Mike, you and I know each other from a panel. Hey. But at any rate, with suicide, 89% of gun suicides are fatal. They result in fatality. Gun suicides make up for over 50% of all suicides. When we talk about fatality in suicide attempts, this is the real number. 86% of people who attempt suicide by any means other than guns will survive. 75% of people who survive their first attempt at suicide will go on to live out the rest of their natural lives. So when we talk about gun suicide, we talk about it as gun violence because of the fact that access to the gun, that the most lethal means of suicide, is a big differentiator. And that's something that does need to be addressed.
Okay.
And so, I mean, this is an access question. Like many of the other things that we're talking about tonight, these are all access questions.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. The gentleman with his hand up back here, we're going to get to him next, but in the meantime, John Courage, how do you react to that? On the one hand, Mike is telling us, look, I think it's unfair to even mention guns in the suicide problem. Suicide is a suicide problem, not a gun problem. Mike, did I say that correctly?
Why we're counting suicides as gun violence?
Right.
Well-
Why are we counting suicides? And on the other hand, we're hearing from this nice lady in the pink telling us, well, look, there's solid numbers showing that the majority of suicides happen with a gun and a bullet. Well, how do you react to that?
I don't know how you can't call suicide a violent act. It may be a self-inflicted violent act, but it is a violent act. But so often it includes other family members. It's not just the person who kills themselves, but oftentimes it's other people in that family who are shot, and maybe they don't die, maybe they live through it. So it is a violent act. But it's part of the whole picture of gun violence, whether it's because you have a mass shooter or whether it's because you have an individual come up and rob somebody on the street. It's still violent, and guns are a main perpetrator of those acts. And one of the things that we're proposing is a voluntary gun buyback. And I would imagine that most of the people in this room, maybe not all, but most of the people in this room would probably agree with me that if we buy a gun and we destroy that gun, or we buy 10 guns or 50 guns or 100 guns or 500 guns, not one of those guns that we buy back will kill anybody or will create a crime or will allow someone to shoot themselves. And so I would say that what we are doing is a matter of public safety
Okay.
that will save lives.
All right, so guys, remember the promise that we made each other? I'm keeping my promise. We're going to move along, and I'm going to ask the gentleman who had his hand up to go. But in the meantime, while he's getting up and preparing his question, this has been up here for a little while to ask you guys to prepare, because we're going to be jumping in next to the electronic phone component of it. We'll still be taking questions throughout, okay? But everybody make sure to take your phones out and do this, all right? Yes, sir, you had a question.
So earlier, one of the slides said that you were saying that the state could possibly limit the number of firearms that an individual could.
No, sir. I'm saying that the state has that power carved out depending on how they go about doing it, but there's court decisions out there that say, you know, that regulatory power is in the state's hand. Whether the state chooses to or how they go about doing it, that'll be tested in the Supreme Court or any other court like Mike suggested.
Okay, I just wanted more of a definition on that.
Okay.
'Cause you had brought it up saying that it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, the lady in the flower dress behind you, and then who needs help signing up? Anybody need help signing up? You guys need help signing up over here? Okay, all right, all right, go ahead, ma'am.
Yes, I'd like to piggyback off what the gentleman in the front said. I'm also a veteran, retired military police officer, combat veteran. And like many of you that have been to combat, we've come back with issues of depression, possible suicide thoughts. But I would like to stop the conversation that suicides in the military and gun violence. We have got to stop this. It's putting a stigma on us.
Yeah.
Okay, it's causing issues that then transpose to an opioid crisis and us trying to get our medication. It just keeps piggybacking off to the next. Amen? Yes. Okay? I have these issues at the VA because they keep trying to push all of these national issues onto the veterans. I promise you, if someone wants to take their life, if a veteran wants to take their life, they will find a way. They don't need a gun. Amen?
Got it. Okay, so some of you are already signed in. For our participants who've never done this before, we have a system we call Mentimeter, and this allows us to ask each and every one of you a question, and each and every one of you to register. This is our first test slide. One of you thinks he or she is at UTSA. And raise your hand and we'll give you directions. Otherwise, welcome to the surprise town hall, okay? Okay, so what I'm gonna ask you guys is to sign in, and our friends who are sitting there with the mics in front of them, you're invited to sign in too. And for those of you that haven't signed in, we don't want your email address, we don't want your phone number, no one's gonna sell you a timeshare. This is all anonymous data that we're collecting, okay? I saw this gentleman right there, you, sir. You had your hand up. Speak up.
So you're talking about this gun buyback program, right? And the chief has stated that he thinks it's a waste of time, which I agree with. I think we all agree that most guns used in crimes are either stolen or they get them from somebody that stole them. Instead of a buyback program, why don't you do vouchers that are good towards purchasing safes, purchasing something that keeps guns locked up in the house? That would go a lot further in guns being stolen, children getting a hold of them.
I like that idea. And so...
I'll be running for mayor, and I'm just kidding.
Councilwoman Sullivan, what do you think?
That is exactly the next part of what we are proposing. That is not something we are leaving off the table. And matter of fact, that is one of the main things, is to make sure that if you are turning in something that you don't want, not something that you want, but do you have a lock for the one that you have? Do you have a safe? Do you know exactly how to use it? It's an educational piece. We're not just asking you to give us your guns. We just don't want you to do that. We want to find out what is it that we can do to make sure that what you have is safe enough to have at the home. So if you need those locks, we want to make sure that we have that investment piece as well. We're not just asking for people to let go of, because I'm not letting go of mine, and I refuse to. But I know how to lock it up. I know how to keep it in a safe. Okay. And even after all I've been through, I still have it.
All right, so I'm going to ask this gentleman a question, but in the meantime, I want you guys to keep working on this. And It looks like, hey, Greg, it looks like there's two people watching the broadcast from Taco Cabana. Okay, sir.
I think assault weapons have gotten a bad rap because we see them
Yes.
in active shooter, in mass shootings quite a bit. I think that's the concern. And so in your slides, you went from gun violence in America to active shooter definitions to homicides by weapon type. My question, by the way, Councilman Courage, I'm pretty liberal, and I'd rather after-school programs be funded rather than eliminating $1 million of guns, because in impoverished areas in particular where there are socioeconomic concerns, I think after-school programs and diversion programs are a much better idea. But my question is, are there statistics regarding mass shootings, active whatever shooter shootings relating by assault weapon or by gun type? I would imagine it's pretty high towards assault weapon based on our collective experience.
All right, so first of all, I'll tell you before they even, because I already heard it. You said the words assault weapon, you should see a lot of guys fidgeting, and they don't like that word, right? So somebody stand up and tell me, what's wrong with that word? Kyle?
What you use an inanimate object for is between you and that inanimate object. Assault weapon means about as much to me as fat lost spoon. It's what you do with it.
Okay.
And so there's a lot, that's one of a lot of stigmatizing and polarizing language. Another one, and I've been holding my tongue on this one, but the whole thing about a buyback. The gentleman all the way here to my left,
That's John
I forgot
Courage.
your name?
Courage.
Courage, how many guns have you sold in your life?
None.
How can you buy any back? It's not a buyback. And it also, it blurs the line and it pollutes the mind of someone who, a 15-year-old Kyle, to think that the government blesses me with the ability to have a gun. So they reserve their own right to take it back. I actually took a few history courses. We reserve the right to remove the government, and that's why we have a Second Amendment. It wasn't written after a hunting expedition.
Okay. So, thanks, guys. This is going as planned. Mayor, check it out. Look behind you, Mayor. We got about 150 people in the room, and a lot of them own guns. And we'd ask this question of every single person who has come to our town halls in the past. And I'll tell you, the majority of the people who showed up would surprise you. They all own guns. In fact, people who were advocating for certain kinds of guns to be prohibited own guns. So, Mayor, the results on this one are going to show you that very few people own no guns. And the overwhelming majority of them show that they own guns. Mayor, here's a question. Do you own a gun?
I'm in the super soaker category there.
Okay. Why? Why don't you own a gun, Mayor?
Because it's not necessary for my life.
Okay. Okay. All right. Hey, guys. So far, we've been doing great. Everybody's been polite.
As of about 2 years ago,
Yeah.
I was in the super soaker category before that one as well.
Okay. Mr. Lopez, you got a gun?
Yeah, I've got a shotgun. I like to hunt birds.
You hunt birds. Why do
that's
you not have a handgun?
Never wanted to spend the money to buy one, and I've shot enough weapons in my life during my military time that don't do it for fun. So if I'm not going to do it for fun, then I'm not going to do it. So I've got it because I like to shoot birds.
Okay. So, the gentleman with the black hat, how many guns you own, sir? What do you think? You own one or two?
A few.
I like you, know what it's like for my community to be attacked. I'm from Sutherland Springs.
Okay.
I'm the man that ran across the street, engaged an active shooter, and shot him.
You know that you're going to be doing a lot of selfies after this, right?
I understand if you desire not to own a gun. But as for me, I'll protect my family. I'll protect my friends. I'll protect my neighbors, I'll protect my community, and I'll protect innocence everywhere I can. I am, like all these officers around here know, I'm a sheepdog just like they are. Colonel Grossman said there are three kinds of people in this world. There's sheep, there's sheepdogs, and there's wolves in this world.
Okay.
And a lot of times, the sheep look at the sheepdog and say, what's so much different about that sheepdog? He's barking in my ear, he's got fangs and claws, just like the wolf. Why can't we just take his fangs and claws away? But if they do that, when the wolf comes, he's just another sheepdog, or just another sheep. As a law-abiding citizen, I own guns. I compete with guns. I have coached and taught youth clubs how to shoot. I shoot multiple bowling pins quickly and move, and I understand it. And I have trained with law enforcement and people around me. And as a American citizen, we have the right. The Second Amendment keeps that in our hands to be able to protect ourselves and our communities and even our nation if we need to.
Thank you for that. That's very important. So, Mayor. Usually when we see on Facebook this conversation about guns, mass shootings and all that, invariably there's always that one comment that pops up and then, other people jump in. Shall not be infringed, right? That's what the Second Amendment says. A few days ago, I was sitting and I heard one of the presidential candidates, Beto O'Rourke, say, hell yeah, I'm coming for your guns, or something along those lines. I asked you this at the second town hall, and I'm going to ask you again. How do you react to when people say, Nirenberg, you and your city council want to take our guns away and over my dead body?
Yeah, well, first of all, we don't have the authority to do that. Second of all, we don't have the desire to do that. And I do want to thank you for your heroism, sir, and on behalf of our entire community, the shared community with Sutherland Springs, for what you did that day. But choosing to have a gun because it's your right to do so is not what's being discussed here. And there are people in our community that choose also not to have a gun, even though they still have that right. And I do want to emphasize this. As the city council talks about how we want to reduce gun violence, whether it's mass shootings, suicides, or the daily deaths that we see that sometimes don't even get reported, it's with the understanding that we are still going to have the Second Amendment. And even if there were folks that didn't want it, we don't have anything to say about that. We're trying to have a conversation about keeping our community safe and maintaining the trust of the public, and also upholding your right that's granted in the Second Amendment.
Mayor, you got to live the El Paso tragedy. You got to live the Midland tragedy, the Dayton tragedy, the Sutherland Springs tragedy by way of television and the internet reports. How'd you feel when you heard about the last one, Midland? What was going through your mind, and what were the kind of phone calls you were getting?
Well, I had a conversation every time, the thing that we do is we call our counterpart in this other city and just offer, any assistance that we can provide. Obviously, it was more sophisticated and nearby when it came to Sutherland Springs. But it's grief, it's sadness, because, I know a lot of folks here know me as the mayor, but I'm a dad, I'm a neighbor too. And I don't want my son to be going to school having to practice lockdown drills, because this is what's happening in our community. And if I'm going to sit on the sidelines, whether I'm a neighbor, a voting citizen, or as mayor, that's not for me what's acceptable And so I'm going to do everything I can to continue to have conversations with my neighbors, that's including you, to see where we can find some common ground to get a grip on this violence.
Mayor, before you leave, because I know you got a hard stop now at 7:20, turn around and look at that screen. I asked the question of our friends here, how do you feel after the Sutherland Springs, El Paso, Dayton, and Midland murders? Look at those words, and I'll start with you, Mayor, and then we can move to the rest of our friends, the elected officials. You see anything that surprises you? Is this what you've been hearing in phone calls and visits with your constituents?
It's not a surprise, but what I would like to point out is that whether it's the young ladies in the red shirts, it's the folks here on the front row, it's the elected officials, it's the folks in uniform in the back, this is our word choice too. We all start here. And so we're all going to breathe the same air at the end of the day. Let's try to figure out if there's some more common ground in terms of where we can go next. How about that?
Got it. Thanks. Mayor is going to be taking off now, folks. He's got
Thank you all
another
very much.
commitment, but we're going to stick around. We're going to keep talking. And so the same question is coming your way to you three, but you, sir, what's your name?
Mark McClain.
Mark, where are you from?
I'm one of your constituents. I'm right down the road.
Okay.
Can I ask them? Mayor, can I ask you something? Mayor Nuremberg, I have a question for you. Can any citizen, if they want to give up a gun, can they just go to a police officer, go to the precinct and give it up? They had a guy in Austin. He gave up an AK. He wanted to get on the news or whatever, so he gave up his gun. Anybody can do that. They don't have to spend taxpayer money for them to go give up the gun. If they don't think that they should have it, they should just go to the police.
I appreciate
Give it
you're
up.
asking me a question you already knew the answer to, so thank you for giving me the answer. But what I would tell you is that what's talked about here is to augment that. And I'm glad. If somebody's going to give up their gun because they don't want to use it anymore, I'm glad it's going to go to somebody in law enforcement.
Yeah, so
I guess what's the question?
Couldn't they go to a pawn shop and sell it? The gun is not evil. It's the people behind the
So
gun. It's
what
their
I would say
intentions.
is that
It's not the gun.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. So what's being proposed is not to use taxpayer dollars for this voluntary buyback. That's part one. But I will also tell you that the statistics bear out. Over the last 20 years, there has been 3.5 million sales, illegal sales of firearms. The conversation that we should start with, I believe, that's agreed to by Republicans and Democrats and even libertarians at the state and federal level is let's get some universal background checks and red flag laws so people who shouldn't be selling the guns or get them don't end up with
Are
them.
you talking about let's say you want to give your gun to your brother or your cousin
Yeah.
or something. You're talking about universal? I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. That's
Make sure that there's a universal protocol for background checks so there's no more illegal sales of firearms.
well, what
which is
constitutes an illegal sale?
So here's the thing. That is an example of us needing to move on. I promise you we're going to try to answer this question some more, but I did give him a hard stop at 7:20, okay? So here's another set of questions. And the mayor just mentioned red flag laws and universal background. So I'm going to ask one of you guys to tell me, what do you think about that? But, Ray, you saw that list of words, right? Where were you when Midland played out? And what did you think when you first got the news?
Well, the first I heard of it, my wife ran up to me in a frantic because her brother lives in Odessa. And she said, I'm calling Joe, and he doesn't answer. And have you heard what happened? I said, no, what happened? She told me her version of it. She got a snippet in the in the news. And then for the next 10 minutes, and maybe 15, which seemed like an eternity before she got a hold of her brother, I sat there and held her hand while she was trembling because she didn't know what condition her brother might be in or her family. So to me, my wife was being terrorized by that event in Odessa. I think all of us deal with that somehow. And I certainly didn't intend to pull out a gun and run down to Odessa to try to avenge my, potentially brother-in-law's demise.
You don't like him that much?
Well, I don't like him all that much. I go bird hunting with him every once in a while and go hold the bird. But the reality is, we all took a bit of suffering that day in different ways, and we all handle it completely different. But that's what I was feeling at that moment. I almost felt like my wife's family had been violated, my wife's confidence had been violated, and I was trying to give her as much empathy and sympathy as I possibly could. Now, certainly shortly thereafter, once she heard from Joe, find out he was fine, he didn't even know what had happened. The first thing that came to my mind was the big word that was up there, which was angry. I was angry and pissed. I just didn't know what I was going to do about it. I knew that I was fortunate enough to be in a position to do something. I just didn't know what that was. And that's why I got together with my colleagues to try to have the governor put us in a position to be able to make a difference officially and put us in session where we can actually not just talk about it, but do something about it. And there's plenty of House rules that have been brought forward, or House bills that have been brought forward that would have worked, should have worked, and we could easily put them into effect.
All right. This gentleman in the white hat, cowboy hat over there. Welcome, sir. What's your name? And shoot your mouth off. What do you got? James Brooks.
All those that are veterans here, I appreciate your service. I thank you, my brothers and sisters in the military. Okay. Earlier, I heard it mentioned that there were 20 deaths from military by suicide.
A day.
Or a day.
Yeah.
But let me correct you, that's 22.
22,
If you look
okay.
it up, it's remember the 22. And to go a little bit further, in El Paso, there were 22 deaths. Well, don't you guys shoot me, okay, because I'm the messenger. I'm coming to say that all of this about gun violence is not where it's supposed to be. I was a prior candidate for sheriff, and I mentioned it in the 2016 election that we would be here where we're at today. So God as my savior, and the military as my brothers, and the officers, I've been in law enforcement for over 30 years, the officers, all of those words that you had up there prior from the Sutherland shooting,
They feel
we
that too.
all feel it.
Everybody.
I mean, we all feel it because we're not robots.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back and talk about stabilization. I'm telling you guys, we got to stabilize this. Taking away the guns is not going to do nothing but make them go underground. We got to stabilize the mental health. We got to stabilize the firearm sale. We got to stabilize the violence. We got to stabilize the officers that come off the street that just did a shooting. We got to stabilize the mental health that are in the courthouse. In the jail. I worked in jail for 7 years. I felt like I was in jail, I'm telling you, because the officers there are treated like robots. They don't get no family time. We're not robots. I'm speaking from the officer side of me. We are not robots, guys. Come on. Our leaders that took the oath, I took that same oath to defend this country, to defend this nation, to defend this city, to defend everything that is around me. Even in my neighborhood, as the one gentleman said from Sutherland, I would do it with my last breath. Let's stabilize this, guys. I can talk more about stabilizing because I have the blueprint for stabilizing.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Now, I want you all to look at this because he said mental health. And it seems like the majority, the overwhelming majority of you think that, where stabilization needs to happen is in this one area. And so, Councilman Courage, you look at this and you'll see that I just chose these because I think that these are the ones that are most often mentioned. But, mental health issues in San Antonio, do you feel like we in San Antonio are making the right investment in the right amount and in the right direction when it's concerning mental health?
No, I don't think we have, but I think we need to. And that really is part of what we're talking about when we talk about reducing gun violence. Buying guns back and getting them off the streets is one thing, but we're also working on mental health and trying to go ahead and develop more mental health capacities and services to people throughout San Antonio from the city side. The city years ago kind of turned over a lot of that authority to the county. And of course, the state has a big part of that through the Center for Healthcare Services. But the city is making a commitment to protect families and children. That's a major part of our budget this year. And a big part of that is working on mental health and helping young people in schools cope with the problems they face, whether it's at home or at school. So I think that we're looking at part of the problem of mental health, and we're trying to address that, and we will address it more. And there's more that this community can do. A lot of it, though, is education, and that means you and I talking to our neighbors and understanding the differences that we may have and trying to communicate more effectively with one another maybe that'll help, but mental health is definitely something we're committed to improving in the city.
The gentleman who's had his hand up since the beginning, right here, come on, stand up. What do you got? What's your name? Kyle, meet Kyle.
Hey, Kyle. Thank you for keeping your promise. My hand was getting pretty tired. So I do have a question regarding the buyback program, because that seems to be getting a lot of traction. So really, it's a two-part question. First one is, where is the money coming from for these?
Good question. John, that's Jada. Which one of you wants that?
Jada, why don't you?
Thank you. So it's coming from the Asset Forfeiture Fund, which is a fund that the police have when they are confiscating drugs, drug money, things of that nature. So it's not coming from the actual taxpayer's pocket. It's coming from that pot of money that they have there to use for combating crime and crime initiatives.
Okay, thank you.
We're taking the money from criminals to buy back guns that we hope will not fall into the
So,
hands.
well, we won't be using cash
Right.
to do this at all. It's not going to be a cash exchange for a weapon.
So just as a point of clarity, you're taking funds from the police that they gain from what? From criminal elements? Is
Yeah,
that-
from the seizure of drug money, from the seizure of stolen property and all
Got
that
it.
that was not able to be returned.
And where were those funds going before talks of this buyback program?
Well, currently, we have a $2 million reserve over the last few years that has been unspent.
Okay.
We're only going to tap about 20% of that reserve fund to use for this.
Okay.
The other 80% is up to where the chief and law enforcement feels like it needs to be used.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much.
Kyle,
so I do
thank
have
you.
one more question.
Okay.
This is the second part of it, and I first want to state I think everyone here will agree that the intentions behind the program are spot on. My second question is, to your knowledge, have there been any other buyback programs that have been successful?
So there have been a few that have been successful. Define success. So some cities have been very specific in the weapons that they've asked for. So if you brought in either like broken guns or things of that nature, they gave you maybe a coupon to go get pizza or something of that nature. If you brought in anything of higher caliber, then they would give you either, at that time, the sources they were using were cash. And what we are proposing is anything of high caliber, then you would be able to get either a gas card, a food card, or you can donate those funds back to an after-school activity. These are all of the things that we are still in the process of working out. This is just a thought process, so we do need more information and commitment of the things that we can do as we go along into looking at this. Again, it's really voluntary. We're not asking anyone to do it specifically.
All right,
Let-
Jada.
Let me add where the successes have been. Boston, Massachusetts has had success. Los Angeles, as a matter of fact, it's been so successful that they completely do it. Okay, but they do it every year because every year they get more guns off the street. So how do you measure success? Like I said, every gun that comes off the street that does not get...
All right. So thank you, John.
There have been other cities too.
Okay. This gentleman right here with the glasses, then I'll get to you in the tie, sir. Yeah, and then we'll talk to you too.
I feel like I had this big long thing prepared, but it's pretty much pointless now. I want to address the red flag laws.
Yeah, we talked about that.
I feel like that was glossed
Got it,
over.
got it.
A few years back, I read this book, The Aquariums of Pyongyang. Good book. It's on North Korea and what all happened. A very esteemed political family was informed on by someone else that did not like them. The family was broken up and sent to hard labor camps. State rep, you just said you're not the biggest fan of your brother-in-law. You make him hold the bird when you go hunting, right?
No, I said that. I said
actually he won't do it.
Right?
You're not
What
completely
if somebody took that as a threat toward your brother-in-law, and now police are knocking down your door with no warning coming to take your gun. Is that fair?
Of course not.
No,
Yeah,
it's not. But that's how red flag laws work. That is exactly how they work. That's how they worked in, I believe it was
I would
Ohio.
agree that they could work that way if some folks were out there trying to implement them that way, but I don't think that that's certainly the intent, and I think you know that.
Well, no, I know,
Yeah,
like,
you know that.
the intent of all laws is to provide safety, but the road to hell is paved with great intentions.
Okay. So, you've been waiting. Yes, sir? Go ahead. You've been waiting.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. Thank you to all the veterans in here for service. Part of the reason I went in the military was to defend the constitutional rights, and whether we want to admit it or not, the Second Amendment is included, just like the First Amendment, all other amendments. I was passing through the Nebraska Panhandle, that's my home state, back in the 1970s. It's got a great big billboard out in the middle of nowhere. There's just thousands and thousands of acres of ranch land. It says when guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. That's still true today. It was true then, it's true now. What I'm coming around to is these mass shootings that we all agree, they're very bad, we need to do something about. I think I have at least part of the answer. The mental illness is one part of the problem, but that does not include depression. Who in this room has never been depressed? Because I know I've been very depressed, but I would never pick up a gun and commit a heinous act. Not on my worst day would I do that. But what I do say is this: when you have a person who's telling a doctor to his face, I want to commit suicide, or I want to kill somebody else, that person should not have a gun. Okay, I'm saying that as a veteran and as somebody who has dealt with guns for more than half a century, since the age of 11. You have to draw a line someplace. And if that person is expressing to somebody, I want to kill somebody, there has to be a mechanism in place, and this starts in the schools with teachers, and it even includes the students. You have a responsibility to come forward and say something about this. That's the only way it's going to stop on that level. And the part of the red flag law that I agree with is in that instance. This information can be forwarded to gun stores, Walmart, wherever. Obviously, these people have no business buying the guns and ammunition. However, on the other side of things, I'm a Democrat, by the way. I'm going to admit it right up front. I used to be a Republican, okay, because the Democrats had they were always the ones sticking their noses in the gun laws, and that's why I've become a Republican, but I've switched back because of Trump and some other reasons.
So I'm gonna do this to get you to the end of the story, because I got another gentleman.
Sure,
Okay.
sure. Okay, I'll conclude it. The answer is not going door to door and bothering every law-abiding citizen and picking up their AR-15 or whatever. That's not the answer, and it will not solve the problem. Start with the felons. Go to the felons, get the guns they have, we know they have, and get a handle on the mental illness starting in the schools. And how many fences do you see around schools? After all these shootings, how many fences do you see? I can walk into almost any school I want to and do whatever the hell I want, with all due respect.
Thank you, sir. I
Okay.
appreciate it.
Thank
So the gentleman in the blue tie, and and before that, I want to call your attention. You all finished answering this? I'm not sure all of you have, but 2/3 of you guys believe, or more than 2/3 of you guys believe, that the mass shootings that we've seen play out in the last 2-3 months were isolated acts of disturbed individuals as opposed to reflections of a broader problem in U.S. society. However, 1/3 isn't nothing. 1/3 of you believe that we really do have problems as greater problems in the U.S. society. Sir, what do you got to say about that, or something else?
My name is Josh Felker. I'm the owner of Lone Star Handgun.
Thanks for being here.
The two points I'd like to point out. If I was an elected official, I would not want to be in your shoes, because I don't believe there is any answer. There's solutions that help get us away less violence, but it's not gun violence, just violence in general. But I would say this, as elected officials, you're up there talking to me how you believe in the Second Amendment, and we're not here to take your guns. But then in your actions and your words, when we're saying we're going to have a gun buyback, the government never owned those firearms. And when you say words like that, that is why believers in the Second Amendment, that we draw lines in the sand. The reason we draw lines in the sand is not that we don't want to, nobody wants to harm people that shouldn't be harmed.
But we have to realize there is evil out there. But when you say terms like that, that's that slippery slope of you're going towards disarmament. That's what that leads to. Maybe not your intention, but we're making this belief that it's okay for the government to buy back. It's okay for this. We need to turn in this firearm, this firearm, this firearm, until we're at a point where the tyranny is there. And I know I'm a crazy Second Amendment guy, but it shall not be infringed.
So I'm glad you said those words. It's almost as if you helped me segue into the next slide. Thanks for being here. You know, shall not be infringed, Jada, for you. Does this leave room for common sense rules and policies? Look how these numbers are breaking down. The majority of the folks in this room believe that shall not be infringed leaves absolutely no room. And yet, it's a question. Okay, but it's a question nonetheless, and these are the answers that we're getting. And, you know, we've got now 60% of the people who think that shall not be infringed leaves no room for, you know, common law sense policies and regulations. How do you react to that? I mean, you're the one who's wanting to do, you know, a common sense that you consider to be a common sense regulation, and you've got 71%, 75% of the room here who says, no, that's, you know, you shouldn't be doing that because the Second Amendment doesn't allow you to do it. React to that.
So I took the oath on many levels to defend the Constitution of the United States. I can honestly say, as a mother, the day that I had to choose sitting and wondering if my child was going to live or if I was going to make it home to my other children was the day that I questioned exactly what common sense of gun laws meant. It wasn't something that I entered into making this CCR with Councilman Courage lightly, because I looked at myself as a gun owner. I looked at the situation I had already been through, and then I reminded myself of the time that we had to worry about how many more moments of silence we were going to have in a high school. And it became normal, and it became something that we became used to. And so when I thought about what can we as a city truly do, what can we do? We are not the federal government, so what can we do? And if we are limited, let's take that limitation and make it into something that people can say, this is what I want to do. Not because you're asking me to, not because I'm being forced to, but because now I'm ready to start this family, and I have this in my home that I don't want at this moment. Because the pawn shops are completely full, and in my neighborhood, we have at least 2 gun shows that are right there in an impoverished place that continues to see violence on top of violence on top of violence on top of violence. And not only 5 minutes away from my home, just 2 weeks ago, did they have another one where another young life was taken by a gun behind something stupid because common sense wasn't even in play when they did it. So I asked myself, can we use this one tool to maybe get that one gun that can save that one life? Because it's not something that will truly just solve everything. We have no way of doing that. But we can do something. And if that means that we have to invest in getting the safes, we have to invest in getting the locks, and we have to bring owners to the place to say, lock it up. That's it.
So
one thing.
So Jada, yesterday afternoon, I had the opportunity to talk to Mike on the phone, and he said something really interesting to me. He said, you know, Manny, we are going to show up with some common sense ideas to share with everybody. And Mike, you're seeing this question get answered, right? And almost everybody's already chimed in, but the majority of people think that elected officials, or the majority of people in this room think that elected officials have absolutely no impact and no ability to prevent or, you know, mass shootings. Do you agree with that? And if you don't, why? And what are these common sense ideas that you've got? Someone give him the mic.
Some of the heaviest concentrated like pockets of shootings that happen are in cities that are extremely gun restrictive.
Okay.
Where people on the left have almost total control. and they don't seem to be able to prevent anything in Chicago, Baltimore, DC, some of these places. So I don't see how an elected official would have the power to reduce shootings no matter what law you
Not
pass.
shootings, mass shootings.
Mass shootings.
Okay.
Mass shootings. As far as what we propose, I mean, and Josh, how many firearms have you denied? How many transfers have you denied? I mean, I have stacks of denied 4473s at my shop.
What is that? A
A
4473?
4473 is the form that you fill out to have a background check done. And these people have failed because they lied on a government document. That's a felony.
Wait, Mike, I thought we didn't have background checks in Texas.
We do. We absolutely have background checks in Texas. And we are, by law, we have to conduct those. I have stacks of denied 4473s, yet no one has ever come to follow up on that. I mean, that's a felony. That's a person who is lying to acquire a gun illegally. That's a felony. Why aren't we going after those people? We're talking about the shooter in Odessa failed a background check in 2014. It's very hard to commit a mass shooting from a penitentiary. He should have been in prison. We're talking about red flag laws. Well, me calling and saying, hey, my uncle's got too many guns, that's a very bad reason to go knock on someone's door, right? But falsifying a government document to illegally acquire a gun, that's a pretty good reason to go knock on somebody's door. So my question is, at the city level, can you guys request possible state or federal funding to be able to pursue the people here in town that are trying to illegally buy a gun? We know we have data to show that those people have a higher propensity to go on and commit some sort of gun crime.
Mike, that's a lot to unpack. Let's ask him. Let's ask
State
State Rep.
I think, do the people from your side, I mean, do the moms demand action? How do you feel about that? Is that something we can agree on, that those people shouldn't have guns?
Hey, y'all, Councilwoman Sullivan's got another event. Thank you for coming, Councilwoman. Thank you. What do you think?
So what you're referring to is actually a bill in the House this past session in the 86. It's lie and try. And they wanted to have a state law that mirrored the federal law so that state law enforcement could then pursue those. It didn't pass, it died in committee.
So, State Rep Lopez, you've heard Mike. I think everybody in this room agrees. People who lie on federal forms and state forms are committing a crime and should be investigated. Sure. The stacks of 4473s, the stacks of these forms should be looked into. Why is Texas so lackadaisical and uninterested in looking at that, really what is a common sense solution, which is start with the lowest hanging fruit? What do you think?
Well, absolutely, the state needs to not only require it, but then we also have to go take the next step, and that's to fund it, make it happen. The unfunded mandate prescription that is typically the case is in play here. We've got laws that don't get funded, that don't get resourced, and therefore they don't get enforced. It's that simple. So that's why I said earlier on in my comments, what the state needed to do, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, along with 50 of my colleagues, was we needed to call a special session so we could enact those things, so we can spend money. When we're not in those 4 months, we don't pass. In those 4 months, we pass laws. We review them. We go through this incredible process by which all that gets debated. Then we pass them, and then we're done. Then we come back home for a year and a half, and we do this. And by the way, somebody said, I'd hate to be an elected official. This is why I'm an elected official, because I want to have this level of dialogue. I mean, I think all of us should have that attitude, and we can come to a conclusion, but we're going to have to kind of compromise a little bit. And I think one of the compromises is what you're talking about here, is having those kinds of regulations, and then the state needs to fund them.
So there's two
Go back
ladies.
in session, and we can fund them. The money's there.
There's two ladies I want to talk to right now. One of them has her hand up here, lady with the white shirt, and then we're going to get the question for the lady in the red hair right here. That's right, ma'am. You're the one with the red hair. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi guys, my name is Lola. First, I want to kind of establish a common ground that I have with a lot of y'all. I grew up around guns. There are guns in my house. I've gone hunting. I shoot skeet. I understand that a lot of y'all understand the responsibility that it takes to have a gun, and most of y'all use it responsibly. And I can completely agree and understand your points of view when you're talking about wanting to keep your guns. Things like that. What I want to really address right now in my time to speak is the negative stigma that not only at this town hall I've been hearing, but multiple other about the youth of this city, and not even just this city, but this America. And I want to start with the idea that a lot of people are comparing us to what adults were like when they were our age. You know, what's his name, Kyle? Kyle said it earlier today. You know, when I was 15, your experiences as adults are very, very different from the youth of today. Some of y'all grew up when segregation was still a thing. Some of y'all grew up with the idea that like it was, you had to be quiet, you know, you don't want to cause a stir. And were y'all like the reasons for any faults in the world? No. But I want to address this idea that when you were our age, but you're not us right now. You know, we are involved, the idea that we use social media a lot comes into like play with our idea that we're not responsible or that we can't have a voice, or what we're saying kind of gets jumbled with an idyllic way of thinking. We understand what we're saying, what we're talking about. Maybe not in the scope in which you do, because you have more life experience, and we're not saying that what adults say are bad or what adults say is illegitimate. We completely understand, but I just want to address this idea that because we are younger, we have not a reliable voice.
Okay.
And then there was also one more thing. Oh yeah, the lack of funding for after-school programs. I know that was also something that we were talking about. A lot of the programs that are available for us don't cost anything to us, and however, I do understand that it does cost money to fund these programs, and that is a completely legitimate concern. Would I love more funding for all of the programs I'm in? Yes, definitely. But for all public school kids, for kids in general, there are tons of organizations available for us to be a part of. There are tons of teachers who let us know it's not just my school likes, but by itself. So I just want to say that the thing about outside organizations and us not being able to be involved, and this is causing shootings and this is causing all of these things, from my point of view, from my school, from the youth of today, that's not necessarily the case. And all I ask is that whether you don't agree with what I'm saying, or you have a different point of view or a different way of life or how you grew up, that kind of just take what we were saying to some kind of degree.
Okay.
And if you have anything to say like to us or like to me, I'm totally open to hearing your ideas. I just ask that you kind of respect us.
Thank you, Lola. Thank you. Now, I got a question from somebody else who I think has a... Ma'am, what's your name?
Actually, I think it's been in my experience that the judicial system is impotent. And
Impotent.
It's something that we could actually do is to enforce the laws that we do. It has been my experience. My husband was murdered 4 years ago, has not yet been executed. My brother they turned on my brother and shot my brother 3 times. So the mental issue in Texas is that you can take the insanity plea. We are one of 3 states that still has that. If they take the insanity plea, they will not be tried. My husband's murderer will never be tried. We have to enforce the consequences for people's actions and enforce the laws. I sit through hearings and hearings where people say, they go through the court system and they say, will you take your medication? I'll take my medication. They come back the next month and they're there. So they
That's right.
have to enforce, the judicial system has to
Enforce
and
the law.
people that our laws have to be enforced.
Got it. And I don't think there's anybody in this room who disagrees. And that's an excellent point, because we haven't talked about the judicial system. Sir, you had a question?
More of a comment.
Okay.
So this whole conversation's around setting public policy and ideas for policy. I think as elected officials, I think the politicians have a responsibility to not mislead or misdirect the dialogue that's
Okay.
coming out. Some of the slides that you put up there.
You didn't like them.
Not that I didn't like them. I was indifferent, but they were set to mislead the group.
They were.
And
Okay.
And they absolutely were. And I think you've heard some examples of some of the statistics around suicides and the murders. Those weren't murders, those were homicides, right? That was a selected word, a carefully selected word. How many of those homicides were justifiable? You know, how many of those were police shootings? So the point is I think, you know, when these people do these mass murders, when they try to manipulate the society, politicians are too eager to jump up and use these issues to foment fear and try to establish more policies, more laws, more controls over people. That's all I had.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Courage. You heard it here. You showed up a little bit to foment some fear, and you showed up to mislead. And how do you react to that?
Just to respond to that, you know, the last thing I want is people in our community, in my neighborhoods, to be fearful. And I recognize that there's a value for people who own guns, who own weapons, who want to protect themselves, who want to protect their family, and want to protect their community. As a matter of fact, I was thinking a while ago, you know, if I was somewhere and there was some kind of shooting take place, I'd probably love to have one of you guys right nearby, or one of you gals, to make sure I was protected, because I don't own a gun. What we're looking at is those things that are falling through the cracks, that are allowing the useless, senseless deaths of people. And if we can make people safer, then that is a responsibility of your city government. And I think that this gun buyback program will help make some people safer. And it's not an effort to deny anyone their rights. It's an effort to try and make people safe in a community.
So, folks, the problem that we've got is that we've been here for 2 hours. We were scheduled for a little earlier to end, but we've stretched it out because the conversation got good. Here's what's clear to me. This conversation can't stop here. There's a lot more that people want to say. Look at all the hands that are still up, right? I made you some promises at the beginning of this event. I told you that some of you were going to be frustrated that your hands stayed up and your questions didn't get answered. Some of you, I promised, were going to hear things you didn't like. Some of you were going to hear things that you agreed with. Some of you were going to get a little angry. Some of you would, get frustrated with us. I think I've kept every single one of my promises. And I do want to make sure that nobody says, well, I didn't get the last word, right? I wanted the last word. So I've nominated our friend Mike Mahosky from Sons of Liberty Gun Works. Mike, you got the last word.
What's that, Joe?
I was asking if you could tell us what you got out of this. Because we were talking about, policies that y'all can focus on. And I
The reason why I'm here today, I think the reason why a lot of these people are here today is to keep the conversation honest. Whenever data is being presented, like he brought up, it needs to be presented in context. It needs to be honest. And policy needs to be data-driven. You're very adamant about this gun buyback program that the chief of police is explicitly not interested in doing. And the news that I read today quoted you as basically saying he's going to have to do whatever you tell him as a city employee, right? You make the policy. As you can see, that's not a very popular idea here, okay? And I don't know how you guys feel about the gun buyback thing, but they're wildly unsuccessful. And what's concerning is that despite what you're hearing here, despite what your own experts, the chief of police has told you, you disregard all of that. Y'all are making decisions what feels like in an echo chamber, okay? And you're disregarding all of this to just plow on ahead with something that you know will not work.
No, that's not true.
Okay, well, we have a lot of evidence to show that they are very, very ineffective. And that $250,000 or $400,000 you intend to spend, most agencies spend that stuff on equipment and training for asset forfeiture stuff. I know this because I sell them guns. So that 400,000 or however much you're proposing, it's going to have to still come from somewhere. There's still equipment and training and things that these guys need. That is a much more reasonable investment of that money, is making sure these guys have the tools to do their job. A lot of the worst decisions that this country has ever made have come at the call of do something, right? The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, so we stick all the Japanese Americans in an internment camp, right? Do something. Terrorists attacked us on 9/11, so we invade Iraq, okay? Or we pass the Patriot Act. Do something. Well, it's your responsibility to maybe not do something, okay? To actually see, and realize that your decisions, and realize that these policies have consequences. Okay?
Mike, thank you for that. I'll tell you, he asked me, what did I learn? And I'll tell you what I learned. I think it's a fair question, and I'm gonna ask the.
I have one last point.
Yeah, sure.
One
go ahead,
last
Mike.
point. Dude.
I thought you were done. Sorry.
No. One of your council members recently said, I think it was Shirley from District 5, that the Second Amendment is a myth, and that it was put in place to commit genocide, and that it's racist, and that it's for white people to oppress.
I never heard that, so I don't know. I'll take your word for it.
So, is that the position of just her, or is that shared on the council, that the Second Amendment is a myth?
So listen,
it's in place for genocide?
Here's what I've learned is that, each one of us speaks for ourselves. And so, gentlemen, can you guys tell me, do any of you think that the the Second Amendment is inapplicable or violable or doesn't exist or shouldn't be enforced?
No. I served in the military. I defended the Constitution. I wore a badge and I carried a gun and I defended people. And I still think that the Second Amendment is worth dying for. And that's the way I'm going to treat what I'm trying to do right now.
Okay. All right. Mr. Lopez, what do you think about the Second Amendment?
Well, I feel the same way. I won't repeat it for the sake of time tonight, but I feel the same way.
All right, guys. I got this fella whispering in my ear. It's time for everybody to get out of this room because we only had it for a summer. So here's the thing. How many of you thought this was a valuable evening spent just talking to each other? Me too. I'm proud of you, San Antonio. Thank you for participating. Thanks for coming. Thanks for having a difficult conversation with your neighbors. Stay connected. Make sure to thank every police officer here. And Captain Powers has an announcement.
Hey folks, it's got quite dark outside.